working with us on charter schools as they grow in Wisconsin. So it's with a great deal of pleasure that I introduce Howard Fuller.
Could I start out by offering all of you my deepest gratitude for your willingness to be here with us this morning and what some of you have come through in order to be here. There was a discussion yesterday about calling this off, and I want to make it clear that Bob Kilpatrick is the reason why it wasn't called off. He and Sid Brown are the, let's go on with it group, what do you call yourselves, the Nanooks of the North, or whatever. And once we found out some people from Hayward had already left to come down here, there was no way that we weren't going to do this. But I just really want to express my deepest gratitude for you all for being here. My job is to try to set a context for all of this, and I'm going to try to do it in some, hopefully, not too long way. I do tend to be a little long, so I apologize ahead of time. But let me start out by telling you, first of all, kind of 5 objectives that we have for the meeting today, so that you can make sure that you help us reach those objectives. The first objective is to kind of give you a general notion of what this charter school thing is all about. Try to put it into some really overall context. The second thing is to then say, yes, but here's what it's like in Wisconsin. And since we have a law, we want to walk through the Wisconsin law. Because as you will see, there are variations, for example, in terms of what you can do in Milwaukee versus what you can do in the rest of the state. The third objective is to allow people who have worked on charter schools, such as right here in Verona and Beaver Dam, to kind of explain what their experience has been, as well as to have someone like Dan Greco from New Generations to talk about, from a perspective in Milwaukee, what we kind of like it to be and some of the problems that we see. So it's to give you that. The fourth thing is to talk about what changes do we need in the current law to make the charter school law stronger in Wisconsin. And then the fifth thing we want to do today is to get agreement about a way to move forward. For example, there are ideas out there about whether or not we ought to form an association of charter schools. We're going to be asking people out of this meeting to come up with a small planning group that will sit down and talk about that as a way to move forward. What I think we will add to that planning group's responsibility is to plan a second meeting. Because as Bob said, he said it was over 160. Yesterday, when I looked at the list, I think it was up to 175. And there were people still calling saying, hey, I didn't register, can I still come? And so this group here is a miracle in terms of the number of you who are here. But the fact that we have that many people interested from all over Wisconsin is a statement that there's a interest out there in doing something different for our children. And so we're going to build on that spirit in Wisconsin, and charter schools is one way to do that. So those are the 5 purposes of the meeting. Those purposes will not all just happen in order, because I'm going to talk about, for example, what I see this whole movement's about. But when we get to the section of the meeting where Luann Bierlein, who's here, who came up from Louisiana, who's a national expert and evaluator of charter schools, she will touch on that area again. So we'll be doing this throughout. But the most important thing out of all of this is that we want to answer your questions. You know, the questions that you come to this meeting with. We either want to get an answer for you right here today, or say to you, we don't know the answer to that, and we will get back to you. We will not make up any stuff, you know. So what we were trying to do is to really deal with it as it is. We don't know it, then we'll try to figure out a way to get it to you. So let me start with the whole notion of charters. For me, I belong to the leap before you look group, because I believe that if you look too long, you will never leap. And that the first problem with looking too long is trying to resolve every possible eventuality when you do jump. And what that really becomes for most of us is a way never to jump. And so the fact of the matter is that when you want to make change, you have to be prepared to take risks. And one of the risks is you will not know the solution to every potential problem that will occur once you make that decision. And so a charter school strategy is a risk-taking strategy. Any change strategy is a risk-taking strategy. If you do not want to take risks, then stay in what you're in and shut up, to be blunt. No, that's too blunt. Don't shut up, but just talk quietly so that the rest of us who want to do something can move forward. No. But I really want to stress this, that we have to get to the edge of the cliff, and we got to jump, and if we jump, we can fly. Now, let me try to talk then about this charter school movement. There are two words that I want to stress. First, I'll do this right. There are two words you're going to hear over and over again in charter school. The first word is autonomy. Autonomy, freedom. This is about freedom from the existing system. The second word that I will talk about is accountability. So the idea is give us freedom and then hold us accountable. And so we're going to keep coming back to those words over and over again. So what the charter school movement is about is allowing a charter school to control the decisions that are made about the school. Now, let me give credit to, because I'm taking this from somebody, from Mark Dean Millott from the Rand Corporation, who wrote this thing here, and I'm using all of his stuff to explain this, because it lays out the concept. So I'll have to mention that anymore, so you know I'm stealing stuff. Okay, so what it does is it gives you the way to control the decisions that are critical to the success of your educational program. A charter school is in essence a step past site-based management. And as many of you will know and experience, a lot of site-based management in America is illusionary. It's illusionary because, first of all, most of the budget is controlled from outside of the school, anywhere from 85 to 90% of it. You all spend hours discussing 10% of the money. You can't make personnel decisions. You can't do anything with the curriculum, but yet you are told you are site-based managing. What a charter school does is to say, real site-based management means that you get autonomy. In essence, what we want to get to is the point where the school controls its budget, controls the curriculum decisions, and controls personnel decisions. What a charter school allows is management by private persons. And when you get into the discussion about what's Milwaukee versus the rest of the state, you're going to hear this instrumentality question, which is a very crucial question. Because the way a charter school is, you all have to, let me lay out a thing here. I'm one of the people nationally who is fighting for the definition of a charter school, because what I'm afraid of is just like a lot of what happens in education in America. You start out with a concept, and by the time we get through mishing it up, what we have is slop. You no longer have the concept. Everybody's, yeah, I'm all for charter schools, but when you really get to it, they try to take it and turn it into its opposite. And then when it fails, people point at it and see, I told you it wouldn't work. So a critical issue is the ability of the school to set up its own governing body. This could be teachers, this could be parents, this could be a mixture of teachers and parents. And as you will see in some other stuff I'm going to show you, in some places it could be a private company, in other places it's nonprofit. But the key is, who is it that has the ability to control those decisions, who can in fact manage your school? It has to have its own education program. You do not have a charter school when someone gives you a charter and then outlines for you what the education program ought to be in the school. If they're going to do that, just stay in the school. Don't waste your time, and please don't put a label on it called charter. It controls its own budget. Very important. People a lot of times talk about policy, and they come to policy meetings. The key policy meeting is the budget meeting. That's the policy meeting. Because for all of the talk, if there's no money to do what you want to do, believe me, that's a message about how important your policy is. So this issue of the budget is very critical. A charter school can contract for goods, services, and real property. What are the impact of that? You cannot have charter schools where people tell you, you have to come to us in order to get what you need. That in essence cuts into the nature of the autonomy and the freedom that we're talking about. Now here's a very important one. Again, I'm one of these people who money is a very important ingredient in America. The only people that I know in America who would tell you that money is not important are those who have money. Okay? Nobody without money in America will tell you the relative advantage of no money. So one of the real issues is, how do you finance this school? Because I believe in order to get world-class schools, you need world-class money. Money isn't the only thing. That's not what I'm saying. But this question of the dollars is a very important issue. A charter school status is protected by a binding agreement. Handshakes are wonderful at scout meetings, fraternity meetings, sorority meetings, but when you get a charter, you want a binding agreement that's clearly stated, clearly laid out in terms of what is this arrangement that we're agreeing to. The other thing is, it ought to be for years, not year. Years. Normally 5 years. To give you a real opportunity to make this work. Because the one thing that we do know is that starting a school is no small task. And you're going to have the opportunity to fail as much as the opportunity to succeed. And so this notion of years is very important. And then finally, what we're dealing with is that really a charter school negotiates its status with an agency of state government. Now that can be, and this, the Wisconsin Association of School Boards is, if not the main reasons, one of the main reasons why we have charter school legislation in Wisconsin. People like Sam Brown, Ken, their support has been phenomenal. But we may someday have to go past where they're at and then help bring them along with us. So one of the real issues that we will ultimately be dealing with is what agency of state government? And as I will show you in a moment, there are variations on that theme. Currently, the only entity that can do this is the local school board in Wisconsin. And so we're going to have a discussion about that. Anybody have any questions? The thing about me is stop me. You know what I'm saying? Because I just go. So if you got a question about any of this, stop me. Yes.
Can individual school boards agree to establish a charter that is operated then by a CISA, or is that not?
Okay, I'm going to let John, when we get into the specifics of Wisconsin law, I'll leave that for him to respond to. I'm trying to set the general context around which we can have the specific discussion. Yes.
Question on the finance question, the indication there of average cost within a district. Do you mean within the specific school district or within the locality, like a county?
Right. What we're speaking to is school district, the school district's cost, you know, whatever Verona's cost is. Now, obviously, if in the general area there's a higher cost and you can negotiate that, you know, that's wonderful. But the way our law, I think, is laid out, and John was, I think we're talking about school districts. Now, if there's some multiple arrangement, we'd have to talk about that. Multiple district arrangement is what I mean.
Some states also, will establish a floor for funding. If the disparity across the district is too wide, they will set a floor for charter schools that may not be as low as the lowest spending district in the state.
Other questions? Yeah.
Two points come together when you say control your own budget and then can contract for goods and services. What would you say about, would you give, I mean, special ed is sometimes included as a district cost and not added into it. Or some specials are not added into it. There's a cost per pupil. I believe it ought to be the full vote.
Right.
Where do you stand in that? Because for school boards, that's a hard decision.
Yeah, well, but see, for school boards, this whole thing is a hard decision. Because, I mean, I'm just being blunt. I mean, for some school boards, it's much harder than others. Because the issue here is really, I hesitate. The question is, how many entities can authorize the existence of charters? If you have a very open school board, this may not be an issue. You have a school board that's not so open, this becomes a big issue. But to respond directly, though, what I believe is that you ought to get the total cost that has to do with, quote, educating these children. To give you an example, Urban Day as a school wants to take ex-ed kids, and they get hit with, you don't have ex-ed kids. Well, one of the reasons they don't have ex-ed kids is they can't get ex-ed money. So that what we're suggesting is that that per pupil ought to be the per pupil that comes to the types of kids that you take in your school. So to me, it is not fair, if I can use that word, to say, look, we want you all to take all of the kids in the district. We want you to make sure you take all the ex-ed kids, but we're not going to give you any of the ex-ed money. Or we want you to have Title I eligible kids, but we don't want you to have access to Title I dollars. That's a scam. Okay. And that's what I mean about you got to have a real clear discussion about the money. Yes.
I've got a why question. I'm a teacher here, and I've been teaching for like 13 years, and I truly feel that public education has to change.
Right.
But my level of enthusiasm is matched with the level of skepticism when I think about charter schools. Is this a measure for government to divest in public education, or is it a real earnest grassroots movement by parents and kids and teachers? By the way, I don't see any teachers unions here. And administrators that are truly concerned about putting kids' needs and their contributions first.
Okay.
Can you ease my mind?
I may not be able to. I can tell you why I'm standing here. This to me is not about the vet, and I'm getting ready to talk about why charter schools are public schools. And I want to put on the table, I believe that the whole thing ought to be open. Charter schools, however, are public schools. That last statement up there that says that you negotiate the status with an agency or state government means that it is a public entity. This is a public school. The purpose of it, though, is to try to give those educators, parents, interested parties who want to do something different, to give you the flexibility to do something different. But with the flexibility comes accountability, which is what I'm getting ready to talk about. So I don't know if I can ease your mind. In Milwaukee, and when you get into the Wisconsin law, you'll see it. In Milwaukee, the people who work for the charter school are employees of the charter school, not of the district. There's a purpose for that. We did not want to drag the teacher union contract over to the charter school. We wanted to give people in that charter school the right to decide how they wanted to organize themselves. Can you conceive of the possibility that teachers would own a school and therefore decide not to organize against themselves? On the other hand, there may be situations where people want to stay connected to the existing union. There may be situations where people want to form a separate union. There may be situations where people simply want to develop very clear work rules for their particular charter school. Again, if you want to bring all of the stuff that you have in the current system over to the charter school, stay over there with the current system. And if you believe that you can make the changes you need to make in the current system, then stay in there and do that. For people who believe we need something different, you may want to consider a charter school. A charter school is not for everybody. I'm not here trying to get everybody convinced. You may leave here and say, I don't want that, cool. But for those of us who do, we need to understand how to use this option. Again, this is about a range of options for kids. This does not begin with what is best for the system. This doesn't begin with what is best for the adults. It begins with the question of what would be best for children and their families. I believe what would be best is to have the widest range of options possible for those kids and their family, and interested enough for educators who've been sitting there for years saying, I could do this better. If you can do it better, let's find out. And this will give you an opportunity to try that. And again, I want to stress, charter schools are not for everybody. You don't have to do charter schools. What works in one community in a charter school may not work in another. You have to tailor it to your community, your reality.
Two questions. One, to speak to some anxieties that I know exist about charter schools, and another one to speak about a strategy that makes the charter school as powerful an autonomy agent as you would like to present it. The first question is, what about the issue that you may be saying charter schools aren't for everybody, but there's a lot of people that say, well, if we have some charter schools, it's going to eviscerate and undermine the system that is already out there, so that even if you don't want to be in a charter school, it's now going to become more difficult for you to work within the existing system because there's going to be a drain of funds, energies, and all of a sudden, a lot of the autonomous schools that have been called alternative schools and have been labeled and mislabeled and generally disrespected and marginalized are now, if they get a charter and that becomes the hot word, that suddenly you're going to have a reversal and the system schools are going to be placed in that position and defunded. Can you speak to that anxiety?
Well, yes and no. I don't think you ought to be funded for kids who are not there. And one of the beauties of a charter school is if the people love the existing place, they're not going to come to the charter school. I mean, the beauty of choice is, and this is an argument I made as a superintendent, if we're wonderful, people will choose to stay where they're at. If you're not wonderful, people are going to choose to go somewhere else. And if we start finding people choosing to go somewhere else, that ought to be a message to us to become more wonderful. Now, if in fact all a charter school does is to create more isolates of excellence, If 10 years down the line, we got a couple of really nice charter schools, but there's been no impact whatsoever on the existing system, then in my opinion, we will have failed. This is not about creating new specialty schools, new magnet schools. This is about a broader strategy to affect the total system. There's an aspect in this that says, and I admit it up front, there's an aspect in this that says, if in fact people begin to vote with their feet and begin to create new entities, if there hasn't already been a wake-up call to the existing system, that ought to be one. A second part of it, though, is to say that it depends upon where you begin your thinking. If you begin your thinking with the system, as opposed to beginning your thinking with the kids and their families, the issue becomes not what's best for the system, but what is best for kids and their families. The beauty of the charter school is it is still a public entity. It is about redefining the nature of public schooling in America. And again, I understand that there are a lot of people who oppose this, but you cannot make change without making change. And what I would argue is the expansion of public schooling in America will bring back a whole lot of people who have left us. I see the charter school movement as a way to go get people who have left the public school and bring them back into a redefined public school entity in America. Now, people say that's idealistic. Every change that I know of, there was a group of people at the point that the change was, they either defined it as idealistic or crazy. And in order to make change, there's got to be a mixture of both. And that's all I can say, Dan. But I know that doesn't satisfy people, but that's all I can say. And then I got to move on, because I was supposed to take 10 minutes.
Can I throw a question out to think about as we go along, though?
Okay.
With regard to the autonomy issue, is that I know that in situations where school boards may be more reluctant to take risks than charter school proponents would have them, that there now seems to be the possibility that they might not load up regulations on it, but they also might set a per pupil budget that makes it prohibitive. And one of the things that charter proponents are asking for is maybe we should have a second way of appeal, another board of appeal. Yeah, one thing to add on to that is now you have a third variable that is not necessarily that if your charter is rejected, what happens if you get a charter offer that is functionally...
Then you should reject it.
Right. It's like then is there going to be a way to appeal that as well?
Right, but see, that's the question we need is somebody to write down. See, because there are two ways to destroy the movement, right? And they come from two different places. One is for the authorizing body to establish so many rules and regulations and questions and conditions that you do not have autonomy. The second way, though, is for you to be so I gotta go with this, that you accept some stuff that in and of itself will also cause you to fail. And one of them is to accept less money than you really know you need on the argument that we love our kids more than anything, and somehow we will make $3,000 work. And I'm telling you, that's a tough decision. But it's a decision you need to make with care. And I personally would argue that if you don't think you're getting the resource base that you need to make this work for kids, think long and hard before you jump up in there, because I would argue that some people want to do this to you so that you will fail. And then be able to point and say, we knew this wasn't going to work. And so you need to be very careful about this. But we'll come back to that. Let me get to the accountability question. Charter schools responsible for education outcomes. The charter ought to speak specifically about measurable student outcomes. If you all are happy in the school, that's wonderful. If you all have parent meetings, that's wonderful. If it's a joyous day, that's wonderful. If kids are not reading and writing and thinking and analyzing better by virtue of your existence, then the fact that y'all are happy is not, that's not good enough. And so what we have to be clear about is this is about student outcomes. Or I shouldn't use that word. Student achievement. This is about mastery of the skills that we need in order for our kids to practice freedom. And they have to be defined. There are things like test scores. And if you don't think that the tests that they give are the best, the state tests, then make up some that you think you need to supplement that. But in the final analysis, we also have to be judged against the same state tests that other kids have to take. Or else that idea that we talked about changing the total thing is missed. That's the debate. But I think if you try to get out there, or we try to get out there and say, we're a school that don't believe in tests, that's good, except if you're going to take a charter school, which is a public school with public monies, there has to be public accountability for student achievement. Second, and this John will get into, but this whole idea consistent with the values of public education, those values get played out, interestingly enough, in our administrative rules and also in legislative designations. And so one of the real issues is how do you do that in a way that you can be held accountable, but that doesn't in fact restrict you to the point that you can't do what you want to do as an innovative school. It is a public school, say that over and over again, and it is responsible to an agency of state government. Now let me just, and I'm only going to do a couple of these because I've gone over what I'm supposed to do. One of the things that we're going to be talking about today now this is an example. In Massachusetts, you get 100% average student costs paid directly to the school. Okay? In Colorado, it's 80% of the cost negotiated with the district. In Georgia, they don't talk about the money, and it has to be approved by the district. The district tells you how much money. So what I'm trying to show you is that along the autonomy line, there is more autonomy and less autonomy.
Wisconsin falls like Georgia right now.
Right.
Just as an FYI.
Right. And we look at, that gives you an example. Give you another example. In Michigan, alternative certification, separate bargaining unit, the charter school is the employer. In Massachusetts, I'm sorry. In Michigan, only certified teachers, the district bargaining unit, the district is the employer.
Let me
That's not
correct
quite
that.
true.
As the representative from Michigan, that is wrong. That is if the charter is with a local school.
Right.
Thank
If
you.
the charter is with the university or an ISD, you have great flexibility, as much flexibility as Massachusetts.
Right.
Correct. And thank you for that. No, Mark wrote this. Debbie, let me ask you, was that the change in the Michigan law?
Mark has several arrows.
Yeah, it was.
Well, I won't use it anymore, Mark.
Right, I was gonna say, Mark.
But as Luann goes through this, what I would like her to do, though, is to continue to talk about the more autonomy, less autonomy, okay? Because that's important for you to lead here. I'm done. Let's hear questions. Questions? Yes.
Not something to be answered right now, Howard, but I'd be very appreciative for putting all of this in historical context. That is, who are the significant players in Wisconsin? How did you come to find out about the charter school movement? Who wrote the legislation and that kind of thing? But not right now, but maybe there'll be a place for it today.
There may not be, let me just 5 minutes, quick or less. Okay, different people came to this at different points in time. When I was appointed superintendent in 1991, I laid out a strategy for change. One of the things in that strategy for change was charter schools. And I was able to convince our board at that point in time to add charter schools to its legislative agenda. At that point in time, I think a lot of people went with it because they really didn't know what charter schools were, but they didn't want choice in vouchers, to be blunt. There were other people in around this state, Sen and others, who were going to, at that point in time, the beginning of national conferences on, quote, charter schools, and Luann can speak, because I think Minnesota was like the first state that really started talking about charters. I got the idea from Minnesota. And so when I walked in as the superintendent, I walked in saying, hey, I think that this is something that we can use to open up the system. Other people began to come to it from different viewpoints. And Rob could talk a little bit about this, I don't remember exactly how we ultimately got this into the legislative agenda. I know the Wisconsin Association of School Boards worked on that. So did some of us from Milwaukee, to get the governor to put that into his budget and into his education package, along with choice and a lot of other things. That was sort of my recollection. There are other people here who can, Sen and others, and Rob, whoever can speak to it. But in Wisconsin, Tim, I think it's safe to say that the charter school stuff has been about 4 or 5 years sort of in the making. Was that, Sen, is that accurate or inaccurate? He's gone. Somewhere around in there.
Yeah, I think it was the 93-95 state budget.
Right.
Where the first charter school law was passed in statutes.
Right.
It's changed a little bit since then.
But the discussion about doing it started earlier than the point that it finally got into a budget and finally we got a law in Wisconsin. And there are a couple of us here, I'm one of them, who's been involved like in the national charter school movement.
Well, just in terms of the national movement, is it linked with the reform movement in England and the provision for opting out in their 90-91 reforms?
I don't know if it's linked, but there are similarities and differences between what they're doing in England and what we're doing here. At least I didn't know nothing about England when I came up with it. So I was surprised. I was in a meeting with a guy from England and he laid it out. I said, hey, that's very interesting. That's what some of what we're trying to do. So I don't know. Other people may know more about it.
Thank you.
John?
John Anderson is an attorney for Godfrey and Kahn. He is our district's, one of our district's attorneys. And as we became involved in the charter school movement, John volunteered a great deal of time and effort to try and make sense. Painfully, yes. And in a way that I'm sure I'll have to pay him back for years to come. But he did a great deal of work at putting together and trying to make sense out of a Wisconsin law that was very unclear. And he has put together his thoughts on that and has agreed to share them with you this morning. I do need to say one thing about Howard's speech. Howard, it's the first time anyone has used the word outcome in this building in the last 2.5 years without some kind of lightning striking or thunder, something like that. Yeah, was that it? Thunder? Yeah. John?
I do have an outline that you should have picked up. I'm not going to follow it, but it's an outline of basically parroting the statute, some ideas that I have. I've been representing school boards for 15 years, and this is one of the more exciting topics that I get a chance to work with. Bob asked me to sign this video release this morning, and I would never recommend to my clients that they sign anything like this. So, but I'm going to sign it because it's important, but I'm not going to put my age on it. We've got a line for that. Where do we go with this? Lawyers tend to, if I can use the way Howard started out, tend to look before they leave. And lawyers don't make good businessmen. And so you have to, I guess, take a little of what I say as ideas, suggestions, things to think about. But ultimately, the issue of charter schools, in the legal sense, is an application of contract law to public education. And the deal you strike is the deal that you strike between two parties who want something to happen. It shouldn't be an adversarial relationship. Two parties want something to happen. You've got to make sure, and I think Howard pointed this out, that you don't muck up, that's a legal term, muck up, the contract with things that will doom you for failure. The law makes the kids come. The money will be there, we hope. The pens and the paper will be there. But there's no guarantee that the students will learn. So the charter school provides you with an opportunity to roll up your sleeves, to roll back the regulations, and to operate the type of school that you want to operate. I've done a lot of research on this, and I've become a computer nerd in the last few years. Never had computers when I went to school, but I've been going on the internet and pulling stuff off relating to charter schools. I've also been using we have Nexus Lexis. It's a computerized research service in the office. And I pulled off the articles, all articles, and I sent Bob the ones that related to Verona, but I pulled off all the articles that dealt with the word charter schools in that combination since January 1 of 1995. 562 articles dealing with that subject, and that's just in the United States. I didn't go any broader than that. And I didn't print them all. Obviously, I printed a few of them to see where the popular press was coming, and I got some government accounting office reports that way. But that's a tremendous resource for you to look at this issue. But first, the topic first came to, I guess it's probably subject to debate, but was first mentioned in a book by Ray Budde, published in 1988, called Education by Charter, the Restructuring of School Districts. And a guy that I admire an awful lot, Al Shanker, who was president of AFT, American Federation of Teachers, in a speech to the National Press Club in 1988, adapted that concept. And from them, it's just blossomed all around the country. The ideas that are here and the momentum that's been generated here is unmatched with respect to any issue that I've dealt with here in Wisconsin. There was a big excitement when we outlawed or eliminated city school districts in the early 1980s. But that, and the freedom that was given to school boards resulting from that, is not matched at all by the types of things that we're talking about here. But we're going to address the law, and there's lots of unanswered questions in the law. And I think, and I hope there's no IRS agents here, I approach income taxes kind of like I do labor law. It's my first offer to the government. And I think when you're talking about charter schools, you know, you got to read the law for what it is. Read the law with the intent of the people who drafted the law. And the intent is to facilitate this. We want this to happen. So read the law very carefully, and if the law is silent, go run with it. Do what you want to do. And if, you know, the courts will catch up sometime, maybe they won't. And you know, you look at it from that perspective. The law is there, it's enabling, it's facilitating what your goals might be as board members or as teachers or as people who want to start charter schools. The process starts with a petition in many circumstances, or the school board can initiate. I'm going to talk more about the petition because I think that's a little more complicated process. It starts with a filing with the clerk. Now, we can talk about what that means. It doesn't mean handing it to the district administrator. Filing with the clerk means filing with the clerk. Give a copy to the clerk, make sure that the signatures are supporting signatures, which is one of the aspects of Wisconsin law that is weak, is that it requires some signatures. some signatures of teachers. And I'm not anti-teacher, but teachers, certainly that's a lobbying force in Wisconsin, and it's a force that has interposed that particular requirement into our law. The key, for those of you who are thinking about starting a charter school, is when you're using this petition process, is to recognize a petition for what it is. It's not a petition in the sense of petitioning government. It's really a proposal. And one of the criticisms of charter schools is that people don't recognize that. They don't recognize that the proposal is something that they're going to have to spend some time developing. It's going to take a lot of time to lay out exactly what you want to do. And there'll be school boards who will be threatened by this type of stuff. And I've seen that. I've seen other school boards that are willingly opening their arms to this concept to interject the ideas of accountability as a trade-off or a quid pro quo for the freedom that the law provides you with. And, you know, Wisconsin law doesn't provide you with the freedom that some other states' laws do, and we can probably talk about that further. The petition must include the name of the person who wants to establish the charter school. One of the issues that came up when I was talking with Bob about the Verona charter schools is, what does person mean? The law doesn't define person. If you look at Chapter 11840, or Section 11840, and this whole charter school law fills up a little more than a page in the statute book. And the statutes are this thick. I know, I've read them all. Every single one of them. No, that's not true. But very small portion of the law, 11840. What is a person? 11840 doesn't define it. Then the next thing that us lawyers do is we look at the school law provisions. Does that define what a person is? No definition there. So we'll go to the back of the statutes in Chapter 990 and look at what a person is. A person is, like you and me, a person, or it can be a body politic, governmental agency, or it can be a private corporation, partnership, or an association. So I intend to interpret the laws today as I think that they are intended, and that's to facilitate this. So the organizing group here could be a person, it could be the union, it could be a teacher, it could be any of those entities. We should recognize it. Colorado law allows for groups of parents, teachers, or community members to establish charter schools. Massachusetts allows businesses to do that, and it's specific. Wisconsin law talks about persons. Michigan requires a nonprofit corporation in some cases. I'm not an expert on Michigan law, but Teamsters locals are running charter schools in some parts of the country, or providing some of the bricks and mortar. Museums are running charter schools. Universities are running charter schools. Both tech schools are running charter schools. Second aspect of the law, and the petition is important. The petition paints the picture. It's the proposal, remember. Paints the picture that's going to get you in the door. It also serves as the basis for the contract that later comes in this. So the name of the person who will be in charge, the identifiable person. I think when they talk about person there, they're talking about a person. And who is going to be the contact in this? Third, how are administrative services going to be provided? How are they going to be paid for? Is the local school district going to be providing these? Because one of these words that I'm going to define, and I hope I don't run out of time, well, maybe I should go to that first, is this instrumentality. What the heck is that? We'll get to it later. I'm going to tell you that now. So who's going to pay for this? What about the grading? What about communications with students? How is this all going to be done? Now, remember, this is non-adversarial. It shouldn't be. We want to make this work. We want to make it work as cost efficiently as possible, because dollars are limited for regular education, public education. They're going to be limited for the charter school, which is also a public school. Fourth aspect, the most important part of your proposal is, and I'm not an educator, is the description of the educational program of the school. That's the heart, the essence of your proposal. What are you going to do? Why should the school board approve your charter school? It deals with the issues of accountability that you've already heard about. You're only limited by your imagination and, under Wisconsin law, obtaining the 10% or 50% signatures and the approval of the district board. And that tends to make the law weaker. Your imagination has to be filtered through those sources before it gets approved. So what are you trying to do? What innovative programs are you going to do? What is your mission? if I can talk about mission. Now, the autonomy of this charter school, and using a word I heard a couple times already this morning, in areas of curriculum and areas of instruction, budget, and not so much in Wisconsin personnel, is in exchange for this accountability. So autonomy and accountability. So point number 5 is the method the school will use to enable pupils to attain the educational goals that the state legislature is told we need to attain. 11801. Now this is one of those, if you read in this charter school law, it says that the chapters 115 to 121 don't apply unless specifically, or explicitly, I guess is the word, unless explicitly stated. This is one of those that's explicitly stated. 11801 talks about academic skills, knowledge, vocational skills, citizenship, personal development, the standards. And when we talk about explicitly, I think you look for a place that says this applies to charter schools. If there was any intent to have it otherwise, it wouldn't say explicitly provided. So remember that when you're looking at the statutes. You need to talk about the method by which pupil progress in attaining those goals will be measured. Now this is the soul of the charter school proposal. The heart is the program you're going to use. The soul is how are you going to measure that? How are you going to evaluate the student's progress, the student achievement? You're going to use grades. You're going to use portfolios. You're going to use whatever. That's something you're going to have to deal with. And that's your proposal. And that's a very, very important part of this. What's the governance structure of the school? How will parents be involved? That's another part, parental involvement. Are they going to be on the governing board of the school? How or what is meant by parental involvement? Statutes don't define that. You define that as proposers and organizers of charter schools. But the governance structure should be spelled out so that there's no question as to what's the role of the parents, what's the role of the community members, what's the role of the professional educators that are involved in the school, who controls and who manages. Those decisions are left to you, and rightly so. We don't want that dictated. You get into the regular school laws in Wisconsin, talks about what the role of the board president is, talks about what the role of the clerk is, talks about what the treasurer's role is. You don't have any of that when you're dealing with charter schools. What are the qualifications that must be met by individuals employed in the school? Again, we know that this is a weakness in Wisconsin law. What procedures will the school follow to ensure the health and safety of pupils? A very important provision. One line in the statute, easily addressed. What are you going to do about health emergencies? What are you going to do about health care information received from outside sources? How about reporting child abuse? Those are all things that are going to apply to a charter school, not by virtue of chapters 115 to 121, other than the reference in 11840, but there's a children's code. There's chapter 48. You're not exempt from reporting requirements for child abuse under the charter school law. So you address those. How are you going to provide psychological and social work services if needed? Guidance services. Do you want to provide that? Should you provide that? Are you going to get that from the local school district? If so, how is that going to work? Those are all things you need to think about. How are you going to achieve a racial and ethnic, not ethic balance, ethnic, there's a typo here. I blame myself for that. I was going to read it again yesterday before, and the snow came, and I didn't get to do it because I didn't get down to the office. What are the requirements for admission to the school? The enrollment policy of the charter school needs to be spelled out, needs to be set forth in that proposal. No pupil, remember, can be required to attend a charter school. This is something that's voluntary. So that's, part of your proposal. Make it attractive. Yes?
I have a question about having it open to everyone without overstepping the boundaries of recruiting. That's an issue we've been dealing with is you want to get a population that represents the profile in the district. If you don't get that through just providing the same information to everyone in the district, and you decide, well, here's a group that doesn't normally participate in school activities or, respond to school materials. If you specifically go to that area to provide them information, to talk to them, is that considered recruiting? And is that then contrary to what the law states?
The law doesn't say anything about recruiting. It's still a voluntary decision on the part of those people if they want to participate or not. You can't mandate anybody to participate, but you can talk about the advantages to a particular group of or class of students as to why that would be good for them to participate in your charter school. You can recruit. You don't have the limitations that would be imposed on a school board in going out and trying to get a referendum approved, for example. You can't spend public money on political purposes like that. But there's nothing in this law that I'm aware of that prevents you from going out and saying, hey, this is a good thing. All come down here. Let's go. Let's go. We're going to go to school. Any other questions?
I'd just like to add to that. The Edison Project, the company that I work for, operates the Boston Renaissance Charter School, and we did recruit, and we will operate a charter school in Colorado in '96. If you don't go out and recruit special ed kids and Chapter 1 kids, then you will not reflect the diversity. And there are school districts like Cambridge, Mass, where I was assistant to, where the entire school district is a school district of choice. They have a parent information center that does nothing but recruit for the diversity of all of their existing public schools. So it's not foreign even to existing public education to recruit for ethnic and racial diversity.
Thank you. Back.
This isn't something I'm considering, so I'm playing devil's advocate a little bit, sort of. Can you set academic standards for admission, let's say for a charter high school, that would keep some kids out because you set the standards at a certain level?
I don't know the answer to that question, but when I read the law, I don't see anything that says you can't do that. But you got to be sensitive to the pupil discrimination laws to suggest that you don't want to establish standards that are so high that by doing that objective standard, you are in essence discriminating against a class of students.
And of course, you want to create a contract that people are going to want to agree to, so just for practical reasons.
Remember, this is a public school, it's not a private club.
Okay.
I think it's important to note that there are public schools in the state of Wisconsin, in Milwaukee, that in fact have entrance requirements. So when people start running this stuff about all you all want to do is to have these entrance requirements, the fact of the matter is there are entrance requirements in the current school district.
Those aren't charter schools.
They are regular schools, and there are processes of counseling certain kids in and out of certain schools.
That's a good point.
As you're kind of laying out all the things you've got to do in order to get your charter with your proposal and your administrative layout and the educational program and all that, I would assume that each public school district in the state has essentially had to do the same thing?
In just running a regular school district? I don't know. That's something thrown out. These people disagree, and Gilpatrick agrees.
Oh, of course.
So in other words, you want to establish a charter, you're asked to define to the nth degree every little piece of thing you're going to do. My question is did the public school system do that originally?
Well, that's one of the criticisms of the public school system is that they haven't defined what their mission is, and they aren't accountable. I mean, the other things are details here. What are the requirements, what's procedures for health and safety? We haven't got to it, but discipline.
Well, then I guess to me the question is, if the public school system as it's established today has not had that requirement, why is it being laid so heavily on the charter? Or is this an attempt to correct the problems that the law had previously with regard to any public school?
I don't know if it's an attempt to correct anything. But, there's nothing in a charter school educationally that can't be done in a public school. So all of these things at some point or another should have been discussed, thought about, embodied in school board policy or state law in some cases dealing with discipline of pupils. Pat?
John, could you make that a point again? And I think we failed to school board member Broner. There is nothing here that we couldn't have done anyway. All charter is a permission to do what boards could do anyway. We could set these things up under contracts from day one, and we have chosen not to until the cage was opened without permission. Now, am I correct there, John?
In some respects, you are. In terms of the, I mean, you've got the restrictions that the Department of Public Instruction and the legislature have imposed upon you.
Waivers from laws, right.
But, Howard.
But there's another one, and we gotta be real clear about this, that we have to take all day, because these things are critical, because we need people to go away from here understanding that. One difference, Pat, would be that in the school district in the city of Milwaukee, there's a thing called a teacher union contract that has a direct impact on what you can do and not do. One of the things that the charter school possibility in Milwaukee gives you, and it's only in Milwaukee, right, is the ability to get outside of those rules and regulations and guidelines to establish something different. So, I mean, I think we need to be very careful that it isn't just the laws and the school board decisions, but it's also the existence of contracts.
It's the labor union contract as well. That's a very important variable, but in most cases, the school board did that to themselves, too.
Right, but the fact that they've done it is not that easy. When you all sit here and say the school board could do it, what I'm trying to say is the school board might have been able to do it in 1890, you know, before, you know, you layered on all of this stuff that is now contractual.
And that's a very good point. Your point, one of your points up here earlier was the significant policy decision is the budget. And when you're talking about the labor unions having 70 to 80% of the costs, you know, being defined, if those are things you can't change, you're working with that 30% or 20%. Question.
I just have a question. There is a notion that charter schools will be exempt from 120.2, the Wisconsin School District Standards. Is that correct?
120.2?
12 standards. It's not a reference in law. It's saying 20 Wisconsin standards. Most of them, yes.
Most of them, that is true.
Where is that in the legislation?
Where is that in the legislation?
Where is that stated in the legislation? The charter school legislation. That in fact, charter school will be exempt from the Wisconsin School District Standards.
It's exempt in 1940 when it says that the provisions of chapters 115 to 121 don't apply unless explicitly provided. You may decide, as in terms of granting a charter as a school board, that you want those things to apply. But by doing that, you got to realize what you're doing. You're putting some shackles on and providing some limitation.
I wonder if you could just help me out. It could be that I just don't review the legislation, which was thoughtfully provided to us as the back page to the program. The exception that you just noted, what number or section is that? I guess that's what I'm really asking.
Let's see. 7B.
Trying to a page or
7B, except as otherwise explicitly provided, chapters 115 to 121 do not apply to charter schools.
I'd like to just speak as a superintendent in reference to the question that Nancy Mistel asked about being held to a higher standard and so forth. Well, we have found in our experience working now with two different groups of charter school proposal advocates is that those very sections that are referred to really are descriptive of what goes on in a school. It's that the district schools have kind of developed that from an institutional memory in bits and pieces as they've grown. And the charter school has had to come to it in a short period of time and actually describe it in a way that the institution has never done before. Frankly, I think it'd be a wonderful practice for the system to go through, to look at those different categories and say, how are you doing this?
Let me try to get back into the outline. How much time do I have?
Oh.
You'll stand up when I'm supposed to stop? Oh, I don't have to do that.
Billable service?
This is on.
Billable service, you're done.
What procedures for disciplining students and maintaining order? Are you going to have uniforms? Are you going to have uniforms? There's some charter schools that have uniforms. That's a decision. That's something you can do under the freedom that's provided here under this law. A lot of financial issues about annual audits. Those are important things to address in the proposal as well as in the contract. One of the questions that we have to deal with is what types and limits of liability insurance will the charter school carry? Now that question becomes more important, I think, in Milwaukee County or the Milwaukee School District charter schools because they may be completely separate entities. You want to make sure they're not instrumentalities in Milwaukee County, whatever that means. They are instrumentalities all around the rest of the school district, around the rest of the state. So you want to talk about insurances, errors and omissions, liability insurance, workers' compensation as coverage for people who are employed. Will they be covered under the school district's general policies, which in most cases makes sense if you are an instrumentality of the school district. The question of enrollment numbers is something I don't have in the outline, but should there be a minimum number for a school to go? Should there be a maximum number? I think there's some practical things that need to be discussed and addressed there. One question, the $100,000 question, which nobody has been able to define, is what effect will the establishment of the charter school have on the liability of the school district? Now, some legislators thought that was really important to put in the law. And I suppose it is, but it's going to vary. You know, it's going to, if it's a separate building, or if it's a charter school that's designed to take people skydiving as part of the program, I mean, that's something that is going to have an impact on liability. But in most situations, establishment of a charter school is not going to have any negative impact on the liability of the school district any more than any other liability that exists presently. Point number 19 talks about quantifiable performance improvement standards. The legislature attempted to mandate certain improvement standards in the last legislative session for charter schools, and Thompson vetoed that, partial veto, and simply left quantifiable performance improvement standards. And again, that is really, the essence of your charter school. Are you going to establish those standards? This says you have to as part of the petition and as part of the contract, but again, this is part of the idea of accountability that is evident in all forms of charter schools. The local boards here are gatekeepers. They stand at the gate. So let's talk about the review process just briefly. School board is required to hold a public hearing on a petition within 30 days of its receipt. What about competing petitions? That would be great if you had more than one petition to consider at the same time, because you could evaluate the relative merits of both. Competing petitions also put you in a situation of having to deal with the preference issues that are under the state standards and state laws as they exist. The preference being for schools that serve children at risk as defined in 118.153.1a of the statutes, which defines at-risk students. So at the hearing, the only thing that the school board is required to consider, now, is the level of employee and parental support for the establishment of the school. That's an important factor, but there sure are other things that school board should consider. Everything that's in the proposal or the petition is something that the school board should consider. There are no other standards specified. The school board is not obligated to grant the petition. They're obligated only in Milwaukee to act on a petition. In Milwaukee, they need to act within 30 days, and somebody who's denied in Milwaukee can appeal to the department, state-level department.
I think one thing that's I'd like your opinion on is we have read this to say the only people who can petition are those people who in fact have 10% teachers from the district or 50% in a given school. Because as you read this thing, it seems that a community group really does not have petition status.
I read it the same way.
Which also means that they do not have the right to appeal. Okay, and I just think that that's an important, and you know, in talking to the people at Malcolm X who are now here, that's been one of the things that we've been raising, is that the way the law is written in Wisconsin, a community group does not have the right to petition. And consequently, you do not have the right to an appeal. You also have to wait until the school board makes a request for you to come forward with your idea. Versus if you want to petition, you can petition at any time. You don't have to wait for the school board to make the request to receive it. No, I think that is the situation with the entire charter school law.
Community group,
No, that the school board has to make a request in order for a community group to come forward with a charter school proposal that is not supported by 50% of the teachers in a building or 10% of the teachers in a district. In other words, if I'm a community body, I'm a group of parents, we could get with 5 or 6 teachers who want to form a charter school. But unless the school board has asked to receive proposals, you do not have any legal way to bring that to the board. The only way you can legally bring it to the board without that is if you have the support of 50% of the teachers in a given school or 10% of the total number of teachers in a district. That puts you in a petition status.
If you're not in that petition status, you're relying on the initiative of the school board, and the school board can say, community group, bring this to us.
Right.
And that's your point.
I'd like to ask a question about that, Howard. So, for example, in Milwaukee with the reconstitution of those schools, and the board has asked for people to come up with different programs for those schools, would that be a petition that someone
No.
can come in with? Okay, so why not?
Because it is not under the petition part of the charter.
Okay.
Because, see, a petition has a particular legal meaning in this situation. And it's one of those things that I didn't spot. And we can talk, I mean, I looked at that and realized that afterwards. And Sen and I talked a lot about this. And I'm raising it because you have to be real clear. Because if you come in as a community body talking about, I want to petition you, the board can refuse you just on the basis of you have no right to petition.
Unless you've hooked up with 10%
Or 50% of the teachers. So you therefore have to wait until the school board makes a request.
for charter school
Proposals. But if they refuse you,
Which they don't have to do.
right, if they have 2 things. One, they don't even have to make the request. Secondly, if they make the request and you get turned down, you have no right to appeal. Malcolm X right now is the only school in the city of Milwaukee that has a petition because it was signed by 50% of the teachers. They have appeal rights. The problem with the appeal rights is the appeal to a Department of Education that does not currently exist.
Question the effectiveness of that appeal.
Why don't they declare themselves Department of
On the issue
Education?
of the 50% of a teacher in a particular school, the law doesn't say there needs to be a logical link between that group of teachers and the petition itself. That is, if there was a parent group interested in starting a charter school, and for some reason or other there were a group of teachers in one particular school of the city, maybe not linked directly with the charter program that was going to start by those parents, if 50% of the teachers in that building supported that group doing it, could that then be a legal petition? That is, Malcolm X teachers, for instance, there was another group that was forming, and the Malcolm X teachers supported that second group. Could they independently start a charter as a petition to the school board?
But John, don't you have to get back to intent?
Yeah, I think so.
Because the intent, that's an interesting idea, but the intent was for conversion. I mean, that was really the intent. The conversion of an existing school. And that's why it was written that way, so that you could convert an existing public school to a public charter school. You know what I'm saying? So, right. Is everybody clear on this point? It seems like it's a mundane point, but it's a real critical point in terms of what you can do and not do under Wisconsin law.
Howard, if the school board initiates the request, that can come in any form through the school process, right? So that if the school board is presented with a correct request from their own administrative team, they could then, without a petition, establish a charter school, especially if they're not converting a school.
Correct. I mean, you could also submit a proposal for one of the, quote, failing schools if the school board allowed you to do that. See, the issue is the school board has a lot of, they have absolute control, to be blunt, but they also have the possibility of a number of variations under the theme. So what you're saying could happen, but what I'm arguing is that could not be legally construed as a petition.
Yes. So you would not have a right to.
Correct. Nor do they have to give you a hearing within 30 days. They don't have to do nothing, to be blunt. They can just say, we ain't doing this.
Outside of Milwaukee, there's no right of appeal anywhere in the state of Wisconsin. There's an appeals process in other states. Colorado allows it to the state board, like Milwaukee would have that option. Michigan allows it to be placed, I think, on a referendum question. I don't know, somebody from Michigan here, is that true?
If it's district sponsored.
If it's district sponsored. The point, 5 minutes, okay, the point is, if there is a school board request, the school board on its own initiative is requesting somebody to bring it forth. What you bring forth, your proposal, even if it's at the request of the school board, has to meet all of the requirements that somebody would have if they brought a petition forward. Not the 10%, the 50% requirement, but the, defining the program, talking about discipline, talking about liability, those aspects. I'm going to jump ahead in the outline. Most of this is well, none of this is self-explanatory. I'm not going to cover it anyway. And the man over here has told me to sit down, so I will pretty quick. The contract, the law requires the parts of the petition or the proposal to be incorporated into the contract. Now, there's an issue here that bothers me, is not addressed in the law, and that is, what if the school board takes action to grant a petition? They don't have any obligation to do that, but let's say they do that. And then when you get into the contract writing part, they can't come to terms. That's a real problem. It's not addressed in the law. Hopefully, people will be able to work that through, and maybe it's a tentative approval subject to working out the details of the charter. But that's a real issue that's here in the law. The other thing that's here, and Howard pointed out that he thinks that these schools should be approved for a term of 5 years. The statutes limit you. It's 5 years. But you can have renewals. And I agree that if you're going to do this, you've got to give it time to succeed. And 1 year isn't enough. It takes a lot of time and effort. Any of you who've been through this, it takes a lot of time and effort to set one of these up. And it's a lot of questioning from board members and the school board itself. So if you get through the details, give it time to live. But when can you renew the contract? Can you have a rolling contract? Can you, every year, unless you pull the plug, can it renew for another year? Have it rolling. The law doesn't really address that. The only thing is it can't be more than 5 years. So the question is that appropriate? Or should you wait until the last year and renew? That may be not waiting long enough. That may be waiting too long. So you're going to have to work that out. That should be spelled out. What will the standards for renewal be? I would hope your standards for renewal will be covered in the charter, and it would be tied to what the charter said it was going to do and your evaluation of that. And the evaluation mechanism should be in the charter too, so that the rules are known, because the school board's going to change in 5 years. It changes all the time. From year to year it changes. So have those terms defined up front so everyone gets a fair shake as we're doing this. One of the things, the charter or the contract, charter is a contract. The contract has to deal with everything that's in the petition, but it may deal with other things as well. I've listed some things that you ought to think about in this outline. And we're not going to have time to go through all of them because I want to talk a little bit about revocation. But there's things that are here that you need to think about. The Public Documents Law, the Open Records and Open Meetings Law, those all apply. They'll all apply to charter schools outside of Milwaukee because they're an instrumentality of the local school board. Data collection, reporting requirements. Again, accountability is the key, so you ought to have some mechanism within the charter as the local school board to get information to see how it's going. Progress reports, if nothing else, evaluated on the basis of the standards that you've agreed would be appropriate. Just a point on revocation. Revocation is discretionary. I'm aware of a situation, one district in Colorado revoked the charter within 3 months after the school started operating. That doesn't seem particularly fair, but it happened. There were pervasive violations of state law and mandates from which it wasn't exempt. So you got to be careful. The revocation's got to be a situation that's addressed. The statutes set forth reasons for revocation. You can include other reasons. The statutes are not exhaustive on that point. But you certainly, the idea of being violating the contract is grounds. The pupils failing to make sufficient progress. The question is how you're going to evaluate that. Again, that's the essence of your proposal. Maybe some proof problems in dealing with that. The charter school violated the statute somehow. That's another basis for doing this. But there's nothing in the statutes about the process that must be followed to revoke a charter. And I hope you don't ever have to revoke a charter. But since the statutes are silent, let's define the terms in the contract itself. Should there be a notice where the local board tells the charter school, we think you violated? Should there be a time for the charter school to have an opportunity to cure the violation? Depends on what the violation might be. Maybe they're using some different type of accounting that wasn't particularly addressed or provided for in the contract. Should there be an opportunity to be heard? Absolutely. Give them notice, give them an opportunity to cure, give them an opportunity to be heard on the question of whether that charter should be revoked. What voting requirement of the local school board is required to revoke a charter? Not addressed. Spell it out. I would think simple majority. Or are you going to try to protect the charter from the changing of the school board? And should it be something more than a simple majority? Should it be a supermajority, 2/3 vote? There's no clear avenue for appeal of a revocation decision, but here's where the lawyers come back in. Revocation of a charter, the issue is going to be breach of contract. You've got a contract between the school board, you've got a contract with the charter school. If the board says you're out of here, the issue is violation of contract. Now, Bob, can I talk about instrumentality?
Find that for us.
Okay, thanks, Bob. That's a fine distinction too. I appreciate that. This doesn't apply to Milwaukee. A charter school is an instrumentality of the school district in which it is located, and the school board of that school district shall employ all personnel for the charter school. Instrumentality simply means agent. There's an agency relationship. It's a means of affecting something. So the charter school is a means of affecting education for students who are in that particular district. It's an agency relationship. When you look at it that way, and this is again not in Milwaukee, it's easy to talk about liability issues. It's easy to talk about how you're going to deal with administrative services. And you know, you don't want to, the goal of these charters is not to kill and to have standards that are higher than you would hold to yourself. This is family. It's just a different way of doing what you're doing now. And if you're going to do it, realize that this agency relationship is there. You got to be careful in some respects. The charter school, and this is again outside of Milwaukee, is not pledging the credit of the school district, is not entering into contracts that the school district isn't aware of. Those are all things that you address in a cooperative relationship. And one of the things that you need to have in your charter to address this instrumentality concept is a dispute resolution mechanism so that you're not running to court every time something goes wrong. And the disclaimer that this is not from the State Bar. This is me saying this, the lawyer. Don't go to court. Try to work it out. Have a point person on both sides with the intent and spirit of the charter, so that you can get what you need to get done, and get on to the business of educating kids, which is what this is all about. I'm happy to answer any questions at lunch, but one question, go ahead.
Just one quick question. You talked a little bit before about this 50% of teachers in a building or 10% district-wide. A lot of schools operate as school within a school, or various, concepts that where building doesn't necessarily define. What's the definition of building?
I don't know.
School within a school program in a building, which really is its own program, operating totally independently of the rest of the building, constitutes a school, and thereby 50% of the teachers within that small group, as opposed to the whole building. I mean, and again, if the law is...
Well, it's not, it doesn't address it specifically, just like the law doesn't address whether we can suspend kids in school. So, I mean, we'll go forward and we do things until we're challenged. If that's what somebody wants to do, let's go forward. If nobody raises the issue, we're going to have something fun. We're going to have something neat and something that we can deal with. Pat?
I think there needs to be a distinction here. Part of what needs to happen for this whole, and I've heard Dr. Fuller talk about this idea of moving towards a system of schools. Well, that has to redefine all the rules, roles, and relationships of Chapter 115 through Chapter 121. They need to be thrown out and redone. Because until we mess with that notion that the board's role, that the school's role is much different, the charter stuff on the edge is only the new and improved alternative schools movement. And you haven't gone at the heart of the baby. Now, maybe we can use this to go at the heart of the baby. But until you go at the heart of the baby's still there, this big 800-pound gorilla. And that's what concerns me. And we need to think about that some. Because this, as a, quote, a movement on the edges, has to go right at the heart. And that's what I get concerned about.
I'd like to thank John. And I truly would like to thank him for the heart that's gone into his work around our charters. It's something he's doing because he believes in it. I strongly encourage you, if you have some questions, not to hesitate to give him a call. I'm sure he has information on there. And he's had the experience of working through creation of 2 charters in this district, and I think that experience, every time you go through it, helps improve and formulate a new direction. Briefly, some of you may notice that it's getting close to lunch. There are a couple ways you can tell. One is a clock, and another is an internal mechanism. We do have, I think, a really good panel discussion yet this morning, and they're going to take a few minutes to set up. So when I'm done here, if you want to take a minute or two and stretch or run to the bathroom, that's fine. But I'd like to get back here and push lunch back to somewhere around 12:15 to 12:30. Then we'll compact it. We had an hour and a half on the schedule. We'll make it an hour, and then come back for the afternoon session. Okay? If that doesn't work for somebody, I'm real sorry about that, but that is the way we're going to do it.
We're going to get into high-level technology here. In addition to faxing stuff to me and writing to me, I'm going to write the other way for you to send this to me. Not that I ever have figured out.